America is just days away from turning off the lights. If Congress fails to act, the world's largest economy could shut down, leaving millions without paychecks, markets in chaos, and global allies questioning U.S. stability. This isn't a Hollywood movie. It's reality unfolding right now in Washington. Picture this: federal workers lining up at food banks, families scrambling to cover bills, airports slowing to a crawl, and Wall Street wondering if the U.S. government is even capable of keeping itself open. The stakes could not be higher, and the countdown has already begun. To understand how serious this is, we need to step back. Government shutdowns in the U.S. are not new. They happen when Congress cannot agree on a budget or a temporary extension to fund government operations. The last major shutdown in 2018 to 2019 lasted 35 days, the longest in U.S. history, costing the economy more than $11 billion. In 2013, another shutdown over health care disputes left 800,000 federal workers furloughed. Each time, the American people paid the price, and global investors looked on nervously. But this crisis is different. Unlike debt defaults in Europe, the U.S. shutdowns are not about running out of money. They're about political paralysis. The U.S. has the funds. It has the ability to pay its bills. But lawmakers are locked in bitter partisan warfare. And because the U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency, every shutdown shakes confidence not only at home, but also across the globe. Here's what has just happened. On September 19, 2025, the U.S. Senate rejected a stopgap funding bill that would have kept the government running past the September 30th deadline. The vote failed 44 to 48. Democrats opposed the bill, arguing it did not provide enough funding for health care programs and social services. Republicans pushed the bill, but insisted Democrats were holding the budget hostage for political leverage. With the rejection, the clock is ticking. If Congress does not pass a funding measure by the end of the month, the federal government will run out of money and shut down. What makes this worse is that lawmakers then adjourned for recess, leaving millions of Americans to wonder if their paychecks, services, and benefits will simply vanish overnight. The optics are terrible. Politicians leaving town while the nation teeters on the edge of a crisis. The fallout will be immediate and painful. Hundreds of thousands of federal employees would stop receiving pay, even though many will still be required to work. National parks could close, visa processing might grind to a halt, and food aid programs could be suspended. Government contractors would see projects delayed, small businesses that depend on federal clients would lose revenue, and markets would react to the uncertainty with volatility. Past shutdowns have shown that even a few days can disrupt supply chains, delay tax refunds, and damage consumer confidence. Politically, both parties are already preparing their messaging war, with Republicans accusing Democrats of reckless spending demands, and Democrats framing Republicans as irresponsible for refusing to negotiate. But here's the kicker. Polls from past shutdowns show that the public often blames Congress as a whole, meaning voters may take out their anger on anyone in office, regardless of party. From an economic standpoint, the consequences go beyond U.S. borders. Global investors watch Washington closely because the stability of U.S. governance underpins the credibility of the dollar. Credit rating agencies have warned that repeated shutdowns raise questions about America's fiscal reliability. If a prolonged shutdown spooks investors, borrowing costs for the U.S. could rise, and the ripple effects would hit international markets. Europe could see increased volatility in its own stock exchanges, particularly in financial hubs like London and Frankfurt. Asian economies that rely on trade with the U.S. would brace for slower demand if the shutdown hurts American consumers. This isn't just a domestic drama, it's a crisis with international consequences. Now compare this with other crises. Europe faced its own debt emergencies in the 2010s, particularly Greece, where austerity measures sparked mass protests and economic pain. But in those cases, the governments literally lacked money to pay bills. In the U.S., shutdowns happen even when funds are available, making it look like dysfunction by choice. That distinction is not lost on rivals like China, which frequently uses these moments to argue that American democracy is unstable and unreliable. Meanwhile, allies in NATO and the EU are already under pressure from Russian aggression and global energy shocks. Seeing the U.S. government unable to fund itself adds another layer of anxiety. as European leaders question whether America can be counted on in a larger crisis. The perception of weakness fuels adversaries and unsettles friends, making shutdowns a geopolitical vulnerability as much as an economic one. What happens next? There are three main scenarios. In the first, Congress passes a last-minute deal, possibly a short-term band-aid that keeps the government running for a few weeks or months. That outcome avoids immediate disaster, but does nothing to solve the underlying dysfunction, meaning the crisis will return. In the second scenario, lawmakers fail to compromise, and the government shuts down for days or weeks. Markets would react with turbulence, federal employees would miss paychecks, and public outrage could spark protests outside government buildings. In the third and worst scenario, the shutdown drags on for an extended period, damaging the U.S. economy, leading credit rating agencies to issue warnings or even downgrades, and shaking international confidence in American leadership. This could embolden China, Russia, and others to argue that the U.S. is no longer capable of managing itself, let alone leading the world. So where does this leave us? With the deadline approaching fast, Americans are left wondering whether their leaders will rise above partisan fights or drag the nation into another costly shutdown. The stakes are not only paychecks and government services, but also America's reputation as a stable superpower. The world is watching. And here's the real question. If the United States can't even keep its own government open, how long before the rest of the world starts looking elsewhere for leadership?